I'm Billy Hollowell, and welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we bring you interviews with pastors, actors, entertainers, and other notable news figures. On today's show, we're going to be getting into some fascinating topics, but before we do, if you are not subscribing to Newsmakers, make sure you head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe right now. Give us a rating. We love 5-star reviews. This is a show where you're going to dive deep into important issues with amazing people. With no further ado, here is today's show. On today's Newsmakers, we're joined by actress Patricia Heaton, who talks about her advocacy for Israel, why she's speaking out, and an amazing conference she has coming up very soon in Israel this May. With no further ado, here is Patricia Heaton. Patricia, I appreciate you joining me again. There's a lot to talk about. I want to get into a great event that you're going to be hosting, but I want to start with your advocacy for Israel because you have tackled a lot of issues over the years. You've spoken out on a lot of things. What, if anything, has been different about this particular issue?
Oh, gosh. It's not something I sought out. Like millions of people all over the world, I was on my computer looking at social media on October 7th, and I started seeing horrendous videos of terrorists butchering Israeli civilians, children, babies, the elderly, families, all families being burned alive, people being beheaded. And I was so shocked, and I assumed that the rest of the world would be outraged. And there was not only silence outside of the Jewish community, but campuses exploded in pro-terrorist rallies with printed signs and flags and keffiyehs, all at the ready immediately afterwards. And I thought, why is this any different from the Holocaust? Why is this different from Paris when the editors of the Charlie Hebdo newspaper were slaughtered because of cartoons? The whole world rose up in protest. Je suis Charlie Hebdo. So suddenly it was quiet. And Israel, within 48, 72 hours, became the enemy. So I just thought, something has to be done here. What's wrong with people? What has changed? And so my partner Elizabeth and I got together and went out to find out what has changed and what can we do about it. And unbeknownst to us and the rest of the world, there's been a lot of propaganda being seeded through universities, through institutions, by people whose salary is paid by Iran, by Hamas, by Hezbollah, by Qatar, to brainwash and propagandize people into thinking that Israel is an occupier of Gaza, even though they left there in 2005, that there's some kind of imprisonment camp that the Gazans live in, even though they cross back and forth to the Israel border to work every day before the war. The one place they couldn't cross into was Egypt, because Egypt wouldn't let anybody in. That's the other border. Nobody has said a word about Egypt putting Gazans in a camp. The reason that Israel had to be so adamant about their security when people were crossing in and out is that for years, terrorists would cross over the border and then murder, shoot, run over, stab Israeli citizens. So I just felt, I don't know, I felt God calling me to do something. And Elizabeth and I had become partners in that. And it really exploded because we didn't realize how little support there was outside the Jewish community for the Jewish community. And once the word got out that there were these two gals, one that had a pretty good platform, speaking up, our mission exploded from the number of requests that we received all over the country and actually in around the world in some places. So we're, we just were answering a call that came to our hearts.
Well, and I want to talk about the Deborah Rising Conference in a moment, but it is interesting because you look at the data. When you go out and ask college students, I mean, even the Holocaust, there's a horrifying proportion of young people who think it's either a myth or it's overstated. I mean, we're talking almost half of young people in one survey that we've seen on this. And it is, I mean, clearly something we're teaching is wrong, as you were saying. We're teaching it wrong. We're conditioning young people incorrectly. But as you were saying, there's a very real life cost to this, right? Watching people go out to campuses and support Hamas or be sympathetic to Hamas without having the details. Now, what you formed, the October 7th Coalition, talk a little bit about this for those who don't know.
So the October 7th Coalition is an organization of Christians who are encouraging each other and the country to be visibly and vocally supportive of the Jewish people, of Israel's right to exist, and to fight anti-Semitism. And we've been doing it through connecting Christians and Jewish people in their communities. You know, we know that most Christians love Israel and support Israel and have visited Israel quite a bit. But often they'll come home to their communities and they don't know any Jewish people in their neighborhood. And we understand that, look, Jewish people are, ministering to their congregations. Christians are ministering to their congregations. But as the Bible says, in such a time as this, for such a time as this, we need to be in more communication with each other and solidarity together. We need to recognize, we need to remember that there are people in the world who want to not just destroy Jewish people, but destroy Christians also. And so we put these unity events together, whether they're at a church, it doesn't have to be at a church or a synagogue, it could be at a restaurant, where you bring Jewish and Christian leaders together to talk about what they can do to unite more, to get to know each other. We support various events, rallies. We've been having groups here in Tennessee who've been very faithful to rally for the hostages every Sunday for over a year. Wear your hostage pin. We've encouraged Christians to put a mezuzah up on their door frame. We started a campaign called My Zuzah, Your Zuzah. It's the little case where the scripture scroll is inside of it, and you'll see it on Jewish homes. And in order to show our solidarity with Jewish people, we encourage Christians to put it on their doorframe. You can go to myzuzah.org and get one for yourself. So we've been going into communities and having Christians and Jews come together in unity, in solidarity, and to fight for our democracy, for our Western values, for Judeo-Christian principles, to secure Israel's right to exist and to protect America's human rights and everything that we've built here.
You know, when you look at October 7th, everything that happened, the work that you've done, you've always been a Christian. I mean, years ago, I remember talking to you about your faith. But when you look at your faith now, how has it been impacted by these efforts, by the coalition, by the events that happened on October 7th?
Oh, my faith has been deeply enriched because Judaism is our root. And so that's where, Jesus was planted, and he was Jewish. And so to be among the Jewish people, to get their viewpoint, to get their history. And for the first time, a few months ago, I went to Israel for a very quick trip for 4 days. And it was really life-changing because you see that our faith is not a static thing, not something that happened 2,000 years ago, and now we're waiting for Christ's return. It is a living, breathing faith that is like a river that flows. That's what I felt. There's a river that's flowing, and we all get to step into the river at some point in history. And this is an important time for Christians to really step into that river and become a part of the people of God in a very active way.
Yeah, well, and you're going back May 17th to 20th for the Deborah Rising Conference. This sounds, fascinating. What made you want to do this? Tell us a little bit about what people can experience there.
Well, I think it's been interesting that Elizabeth and I are two women in a space that's normally been led by men.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit of a different vibe, should we say. And when you look in the Old Testament, Deborah was the only female judge in the Old Testament. And it was her wisdom that helped save Israel from its enemies. And so we feel like we want to bring women together, Jewish and Christian, to exchange our own experiences about our faith, how our faiths combine and cross over, and what we can receive from each other. And to hear speakers with different views about the Old Testament and the New Testament, hearing interpretations of the Bible through different eyes from different perspectives, and creating friendships from all over. And because we are in the majority, we just have to have that kind of voice. And sometimes it's scary to think you're standing up against this overwhelming wave of hostility and aggression, but actually we are in the majority. Most people want to live in peace. Most people do not want to kill Jews or kill Christians. And we just have to stand up and say it. You wouldn't think you would have to say that. You would think that's a given, but we can no longer take anything for granted. And when women come together, they're very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to get more information on that, where can they go to do that?
October, the number 7, coalition.org, or .com.
Perfect. So, okay. One of the things that's happening as you and I are talking, it's been a big week. We had Trump's inauguration, Biden left the White House, but leading up to that, you had this hostage release that was relatively shocking in that, Biden had been negotiating apparently this in his administration since last May. And it was leading up, just days before Trump is about to take over. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all. I found it interesting. At least one of the families called Trump or was crediting Trump for it, and he wasn't even president yet. Do you think this shift is going to impact what has been going on there in the Middle East?
I pray that it's going to be cleaned up pretty quickly now that President Trump is in office. I think there was a little too much, the previous administration speaking out of both sides of its mouth. We support Israel, but now here's restrictions. Don't go into Rafah, where hostages were being held. And people know that President Trump takes action. Whether you like that or not, obviously that's a question. But I think the fact that he said, if those hostages are not released before I come into office, there's going to be hell to pay. And he's not a person who just talks. He actually takes action when he says something. So that scares some people. I think for Israel, it's a good thing. And we saw that 3 hostages were released. Praise the Lord. And I'm hoping that the rest are released. I know that we've heard some of them are not alive. So we're still all in a state of waiting and anticipation and hoping and praying for the hostages and for their families. But I do believe that it is absolutely President Trump's being in office. He just defunded UNRWA. So UNRWA was the sort of education arm from the UN in Gaza, and they have been teaching young children to kill Jews. That's what they do. They teach them to kill Jews. There's no way we should have ever been supporting UNRWA. And in fact, the UN is very, very anti-Semitic. So to have someone with this who supports Israel to the extent that President Trump does is going to be a great thing for Israel. They're going to now have a true friend in the United States.
Well, and I think, you saw that even with polling of the Israeli people leading up to the election in America, the majority of them wanted to see Trump win. And so you have to start asking questions. It doesn't matter whether you're left or right or center. Why do they want to see Trump win? Right? Because they believe he's going to do a better job for their country and for them. And I think we have seen that already. We'll see where it goes from here. A question about Hollywood for you, because obviously being a staple of Hollywood and being as big of a name as you are there, how has Hollywood reacted to your advocacy on this issue? And I guess other issues too. You've been very pro-life. You've spoken out about a lot of things. How has Hollywood traditionally reacted? And is the reaction on the Israel front any different from that?
Many years ago when I was on Raymond and I think the West Wing was on, I was at a Hollywood event. And one of the cast members of West Wing came up to me and said, "You're the only Republican anyone in this town likes." So I was like, I think that's a compliment. I don't know. Listen, basically, Hollywood has been my community for many years, even though I'm more of an outlier there because of some of those stances. When you talk about politics, when you just talk about working, it's a very difficult business to get a show picked up, greenlit, on the air, and keep it on the air. And so for the 99% of what Hollywood does is show up to work, you know your lines, you can hit your marks, you're kind to everyone, you respect your crew, you're considerate, you're professional, you promote your show. That's what really Hollywood is about, because you can do all those things to the best of your ability and your show still gets canceled or your show still doesn't get picked up. So it's a tough, tough, tough business. And I think that's something I share with all actors, regardless of what their political stance is. So that's kind of how, I am with Hollywood. And, so I'm probably not invited to as many women's events in Hollywood as some, because, that pro-life thing is a third rail there. What are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do?
Let me ask you, what was your reaction? And I just have one more question for you after this, but your reaction to Roe v. Wade and all of that being overturned. I mean, this is something that people wanted for years. Many people, not everyone, obviously. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people thought it would never happen. It was sort of that thing everybody talked about, right? They marched for it, but then it happened. I mean, when you look at where we are, what goes through your heart and your mind in light of the work you've done in that space?
Well, I was as shocked as everybody. Didn't expect it. But it was a call to Christians to now redouble and triple the enormous efforts they were already making to give women actual choice by providing services that people like Planned Parenthood don't provide to pregnant women. So Planned Parenthood and many other abortion clinics are not really about choice. They offer one thing, that's abortion. And they offer it in many different ways. And so to really have choice, you need people like Christians in the United States who have medical clinics, and even the ones who can't afford to open medical clinics. There's emotional support, there's practical support with diapers and caregiving and whatever a person needs. So all that said to me was, we're going to have to do more than we've been doing, and open up the adoption system. That might be a good thing for the administration to look at, especially as our population is declining, to open the adoption system, make it easier for people to qualify for adoption. So that's what it meant to me. As Christians, we're going to have to step up even more to support women and their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's true. And we're seeing that need out there incredibly across the country right now. Final question for you. You have had numerous successful shows and films, and I mean, you've had this amazing career, and you've done all the work that you're doing now. You're continuing to do this. What do you want your legacy to be at the end of the day?
Well, my husband, David Hunt, and I have a production company called Four Boys Entertainment, FOURBOYS, because we have four sons. And we've thought about a legacy, as small as it might be, as a small contribution to the culture. But nevertheless, God tells us to, don't put our light under a bushel, put it up on a hill. So we have a little hill here that we've tried to put some things on. The movie Amazing Grace about the abolitionist William Wilberforce. I was fortunate to be in two really wonderful family comedies that were incredible writing, acting, producing. And we hope through our projects that we leave the planet a little bit better than we left it. We have a wonderful movie currently on Amazon Prime called Unexpected with Anna Camp and Joe Mazzello. It's about a couple who can't get pregnant, and the mom wants to adopt and the husband does not. And so it's their kind of quirky comedic journey through that issue in their marriage, called Unexpected at Amazon Prime. And those are the kind of things that we want to bring to people, where we don't sugarcoat anything, but there's always a sense of hope and optimism and joy. And so it's a legacy for our sons, so that when people say, what did your mom and dad do? They can point to these projects that we hope were for the spiritual and emotional betterment of mankind. That sounds kind of big.
No, but it is big. But I mean, it is big. I think it's a great legacy to have too, and you've done it so beautifully. Again, your conference, I just want to mention this one more time, Deborah Rising Conference. It's May 17th through the 20th, and people can check that out on the October 7th Coalition website. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
That's all for today's Newsmakers. I'm Billy Hollowell. Make sure you head on over and rate this show on your favorite podcast platform. Let your friends and family know to listen as well. We have new episodes Monday through Friday on your favorite podcast platforms. You can also watch the Newsmakers TV show on the CBN News channel. That show airs once a week with 3 incredible interviews with newsmakers. Be sure to head on over and watch that, and also head over for more interviews to the CBN News YouTube channel and cbnnews.com. I'll see you again very soon for another Newsmakers.